This afternoon's panel is an attempt to build on everything we've heard before and to look at some of the real challenges and opportunities available thinking about getting to scale, thinking about what are the things that most need to change in order to make it possible to provide affordable housing for seniors in rural America, especially using the co-op model. And anyone who's been working in this area will be happy or unhappy to tell you, and you've heard from a lot of the speakers who've referred to the fact that financing is a major barrier to making it possible to provide exactly the energy efficient, modern, universal designed, manufactured home that is the equivalent of a stick-built single-family home for seniors in rural America. Two kinds of financing. We've talked about this, but I'm going to just say it again. Two kinds of financing involved here. When we broke down at the end of the morning's panel what the components are that you need to bring in, what you're financing in the conversion and adding to the acquisition of land and the improvement of community facilities and a manufactured housing park conversion, and then what it is that the family is financing by replacing an inefficient manufactured home with a new Energy Star Plus home, whether it's in a park, cooperatively owned, or on single-family land, or the family-owned land. You're talking about two different things. And being a cooperator, I think about them as blanket loans, that is, loans secured by the real estate that's owned by the cooperative corporation, and what I call share loans. And that's loans secured by what is owned by the individual cooperator. Okay? In cooperative housing, generally that cooperative interest is a right of occupancy plus an ownership interest in the corporation that owns all of the lands plus all of the improvements. That's not what goes on in manufactured housing. But it's very similar, because what's securing a loan, potentially, is the ownership interest in the co-op, plus the actual manufactured housing unit. Okay? So blanket loans and share loans, or I'm perfectly happy if you call them home loans. But I think of them as share loans because they can also finance the acquisition or resale of a membership, as well as the replacement of a unit of housing. Okay? And we're going to talk about this from a wide variety of viewpoints. We're going to start with Shelley, who's going to talk about the potential involved in the financing that's available through her Community Development Loan Fund. Rural electrics, 6 rural electrics, 7 rural electrics, aggregated together, producing loan funds that are revolved, so they come back. I'm assuming that your default rate is pretty much as low as Terry Simonette's. And partnering with a variety of partners, and I think this is a very interesting part of her discussion, to provide a whole bunch of services, home improvements, new housing in very tiny rural communities, and financed in large part without any government programs. So, Shelley, take it away.
Take it away. Well, I'll preface this with two things. Number one, I'm kind of sloppy seconds. Liz Bailey had contacted my boss, Bob Bauman, who's the general manager of the Butler County Rural Electric Cooperative and is also the president of Homeward Inc., which is our loan fund. And secondly, we've done maybe a handful of manufactured housing loans, and they were only on property that people owned. So my experience with manufactured housing loans and our experience in that is kind of limited, but that's why I'm here. We're very much interested in other possibilities. My own personal history is that between 1998 and 2000, I helped put together a modular housing factory as a nonprofit we built in Wilton, Iowa. And our problem there, we produced 50 houses in a year and sold them, some of them to Bob and most others to families, and produced a Energy Star home right off the bat, and did really well. Our problem is that it was access to capital and lines of credit, and our board kind of pulled the plug on that one. But we still we feel like we built a successful model. We just couldn't get the buy-in from the lenders. They were making way too much money doing subprime selling and not that much in actual community investments. But that's a whole nother story, and I just want to talk about Homeward today. But Homeward was established in 1996. It started with 4 rural electric cooperatives in north central Iowa, and now it's 7. And our service area covers 36 counties, but the preponderance of our loans are in 25 counties. And we are a lean operation in the cooperative sense, in that I'm a very part-time person, and I do some government affairs and program development and resource development. And we have a full-time person on a staff who really handles all the loans. She has a real estate license. She's also a tremendous community person, understands the co-op models, has worked for the co-op. And then we share the accounting and the auditing with the RECs. We have a financial person that works for one of the RECs that is our financial person, so that manages that. So we're a very lean operation, and but we produce. But the initial purpose was to improve the vitality of Iowa's rural communities by providing financial and other development services. And I will say that we have developed our programs over the years. We started out as we wanted to make down payment and closing cost assistance available to families, and we wanted to also help. We were looking at there were some studies that were done in the mid-90s that really showed the deterioration of housing stock, particularly in rural communities in Iowa, and also the aging of communities in rural Iowa. So these co-ops were interested in keeping people on their lines and helping these small communities. And we also were looking at making homes more affordable to maintain and to make small towns attractive to purchase. As we developed the programs, and as the other programs started to be successful and subscribed to, we also looked at other ways that we could encourage home ownership. And one of the first things that the co-op has done, and I was really interested in what Mike said about measuring twice and cutting once, we've done a couple of studies that we think are pretty kind of informed our movement into the different lines of business that we chose. We worked primarily with the University of Northern Iowa with their real estate program. That's the university that's closest to where our service area is, and they have a pretty well thought of real estate program there, and as well as a pretty good basketball team that kind of beat Kansas a couple years ago. We're hanging our hat on that for many years now. So anyway, they came in and they did 2 studies for us. One was an employer-assisted housing study, and that was back in 1998 that they did the study for us. And what we looked at was that we surveyed some businesses and we surveyed some communities, and then we designed a down payment closing cost assistance program that really focused on, we were looking at 115% or below median income. And what we found were volunteer firefighters, deputy sheriffs, teachers, a lot of small town community employees fit the bill. And to encourage particularly younger people to become involved in those resources in the town, the volunteer firefighters, et cetera, it was another attractive element that communities could offer. We worked with boards of supervisors and mayors of small towns in our service area, and that was a good line of business for us. And then in one of our current programs, there's an ethanol plant that was built in a small town called Shell Rock, and it was talking about bringing about 200 jobs online there, which for a town of about 1,100 people, that's a significant increase in population and a housing problem. I mean, people were going to have to live in the bigger city, or, they wanted to encourage people to move into the town. So we did an employer-assisted housing program in conjunction with the development of the ethanol plant, and that has worked pretty well for us. And then the second study that we did was around 2002, 2003. We looked at, there was a lot of new highway construction going on, and there were some offsets where people, it actually avoided some towns. It took them out of some of the smaller towns, and the towns that were concerned about what are we going to, people aren't going to be passing through, and how do we get people to stay in our town or come back. And we looked at what we called amenity-related housing developments, because one of the offshoots of this highway construction was there were some pothole lakes that were developed in conjunction with the earth moving that went on with some of these things. And then there were also some smaller towns, believe it or not, that used some of the right-of-way land that they ended up getting back as they built a couple of golf courses. And so we're looking at amenity-related housing developments, and one development that we worked with in Grundy Center, Iowa, was a golf course development, but that built affordable housing as part of its development. And so we made some construction loans there, and that was kind of the beginning of our designing a new construction loan program there. And that leads us to the construction loan program, which right now is probably our most successful of all of our, I think that you have a handout that has some of our other programs listed in there that I'll talk about briefly in a second. But in Garner, Iowa, we started out where we looked at loaning to developers, and then it was a pick and choose winners and losers kind of thing with working with private developers. And we had just one loan to a private developer go south on us, and we decided that we would make loans to communities directly and let the community or the Economic Development Corporation in the community make those choices on who they knew were the most viable. In this case, in Garner, Iowa, which is kind of a bedroom community to Mason City, Iowa, which is, Clear Lake, it's actually closer to Clear Lake, which is famous for, we're buddy the developers. They had an incentive deal for the land and the infrastructure. They had that put together, and then we came in with our piece on the construction financing side, and that bloomed out to 2 subdivisions and 57 homes, and that was kind of in the middle of, and then kind of at the end of the blow up of the mortgage market, but this still worked out. The side effect was I remember when we kind of showed the project to the public, the city and the Community Development Corporation and Homeward did, a nice song and dance with the congressional staff and the local folks and the press. The Iowa Finance Authority he came up from Des Moines and he's driving around this little development and he said, I counted 12 pickup trucks, meaning construction trucks, that were out working on these houses. And that struck home to him that in this little town there were a lot of jobs being generated, and they were to small businesses, smaller contractors that were within that area there, so the economic impact. And then there were 36 new children in the school district over that next year, and the per pupil reimbursement to the school district was significant. So that's where we kind of started on this path of really seeing the construction financing program being successful. But in terms of and I'll wrap up just by referring you to, we have used HUD money in that we've used the Rural Housing and Economic Development Program. We were lucky enough early on to get in on 3 different grants, and that helped us expand our energy efficiency programs, and it also helped us expand our construction finance programs. And we offset those years we didn't get the RHED with EDIs, which for those of you in the business, those were the good old days of the Economic Development Initiative grants through the HUD program. And in that respect, we were able to subsidize the equity money and the money that the co-ops put into their pool. But we've got $11 million in loans, 1,200 families assisted over the years. And we've got about 2 million loans outstanding out of 11 million lent. And so we're just plugging away out there, and we're looking for, as I say, we have generally looked at where and talked to our communities. So we're very much involved with all of the county governments and city governments in our service areas to identify where there's a gap, and where there's a gap in what the state does, and there's a gap in, well, there's just no services out in the very rural areas. We only work in communities under 5,000 in population as well. But we look for those gaps, and this is definitely a manufactured product would be good for us, I think, and the more I found out about it, I think that it's a way to go. And I think we do something similar to Mike, but the idea of using Red Leg for that is something that we're really interested in. So I don't know if that helps you, or?
Yeah, I think that's terrific. Let's move on, and we're going to turn next to Mike Sloss. Mike is the rock side of the CFED spinoff, and that's Resident-Owned Communities USA. And he's going to talk about the work that they're doing in making manufactured housing park conversions to cooperative ownership a replicable, financeable, sustainable piece of rural life.
Excellent. Thank you, Terry. So we've heard a little bit throughout the day about what Rock USA is about and what we do. I'll just take a few minutes and put my own umbrella around that, I guess, so you have a clear picture. And the first thing I would say is Rock USA itself, as a national nonprofit social enterprise, is really a young organization. We officially launched around this time in 2008, so we're almost 4 years old as a national organization. But the history of the work that we do, and it's been referenced, goes back to the mid-'80s in New Hampshire, where the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund had advanced this model of resident-owned manufactured home communities. And just so you know their history a little bit, I'll just put it in 2 numbers for you. In those 26 years, and it just happened a couple months ago, they closed on the 100th resident-owned manufactured home cooperative in the state of New Hampshire. And that's over 6,000 homeowners who live in those 100 communities. And that was a real big benchmark, as you can understand, and we're going to celebrate that in the fall up there with a big party. But the more important piece of their work and what really motivated the national effort was the economic value proposition for homeowners that resident ownership represents. And let me just take a second and put that in clear terms for you. Homeowners on land lease communities, and Rick talked about this earlier, there's some 50 to 60,000 manufactured home communities around the country, 2.9 million families living in them. The traditional model of an investor-owned community, you pay lot rent, you may have a lease, you may not have a lease. You could, as Rick said, you could be forced off the land at any time, potentially through change of use, sale, and other things. But the basic economic thing operating there is because your home is not easy to move and is expensive to move, you don't move it, right? And every year, the investor owner of the community knows that and raises your lot rent, 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever they can get away with. It's not a regulated system. And so as your lot rent goes up every year, your home value goes down, just inversely proportional. And that's the economic life of manufactured homeowners. It's not good for them. It's not a good value proposition at all. And so what the resident ownership model that Rock USA uses and New Hampshire Community Loan Fund has used for years reverses that dynamic, puts long-term ownership of the land in the hands of the people who live there, stabilizes those annual lot rents because you begin to operate the community on a cooperative, not-for-profit basis. And as Terry mentioned earlier, if you looked at, and they've done this study in New Hampshire, and I'll give you 2 more facts. Over time, the difference between monthly co-op fees or lot rents in a resident-owned community versus an investor-owned community will go down, they'll be less, and then the home values that upon resale will be higher. And this has been proven and documented by the University of New Hampshire. 12% higher, same homes in resident-owned communities as in investor-owned communities when they resell, and they sell faster. Time on the market is less. So we know from the experience in the state of New Hampshire, there's been over $200 million of land acquisition financing put into those communities, that this economic proposition that we're talking about works for low-income homeowners. And so in 2008, when Rock USA was launched, the idea was, how do we bring this model to scale at a national level? We couldn't just have New Hampshire run a national program. I mean, they're set up to operate in New Hampshire. So Rock USA was formed by New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, CFED, NCB Capital Impact, Terry Simonette's group was here earlier, and NeighborWorks America. And those 4 entities created a nonprofit LLC. So part of the structure and the governance of our organization is built for national scale by bringing in national entities to be part of it. They all put up equity. On my balance, I run the lending side of Rock USA, and on my balance sheet are investments from all of those entities that are part of our LLC. The other side of Rock USA, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, our model is based upon an integrated approach to financing communities and providing the necessary technical assistance to homeowner groups so that they can move through this process of ownership smoothly and with as little difficulty as possible. And that's really important. The other side of our organization is called Rock USA Network. There are 9 certified nonprofit providers out there across the country working in 22 states to deliver these services as these communities come up for sale. We do not work with communities that are not for sale. So the other thing you need to know about the marketplace that we work in and that we invest in is this is a huge commercial real estate marketplace, huge. All the biggest financial institutions and real estate companies in the country are active in the manufactured housing community sector in one way or another. Wells Fargo Bank being one of the biggest. Cushman & Wakefield does many of my appraisals on manufactured home communities. Marcus and Millichap, CB Richard Ellis. These are some of the biggest commercial real estate brokerage companies in the country. They all have units that just deal in manufactured housing, community sales and resales and purchases. And so we get to know these people really well. You know, we're in there playing with the big boys. And what that means is when these communities are for sale, we have to act fast, we have to act in a coordinated fashion, and all of the work that's been done in New Hampshire over 26 years, the intellectual property, the processes, the steps, the financing has all been transferred to Rock USA to do this work. And I'll take a second and just point you to the newsletter that's in your package. It's our latest newsletter. And this is one of the fastest deals we had to do a couple years ago. On the first page of this newsletter is the story of Meadow Valley Park in Unadilla, New York. This is both a rural community and a senior community. 54 homes, and I'll try to describe to you where Unadilla, New York is. Most of you probably don't know. I certainly didn't know until I got there. If you fly to Albany and you drive an hour southwest towards Binghamton, you hit it. And if you've ever been to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, you're about 20 miles south of there. And it's a very pretty little place, but it's just a village. There's really not much there. So these folks, I'm just going to read you the first paragraph of this article. This is the woman who is the original founding president of Meadow Valley Park, Inc. I arrived home one day and was told the park was being foreclosed on. My first thought was, we have to go to our neighbors and figure out how we can buy it. So in one of the first presentations this morning, Terry Simonet said, if you're going to invest in cooperatives, invest in motivated cooperators. And these people were incredible. They had 30 days to show up at the county courthouse with a financing package and a dollar amount that they could bid at foreclosure. The foreclosure was not because the community was in disrepair. It was a very nice community, actually. The foreclosure had to do with the ownership entity of the park and some other properties that they were not managing well. And so in about 10 days, these folks, 53 of them, they had 40-some members signed up. They had developed their bylaws that we had given them models for, and they were ready to go. And they went to the courthouse steps 30 days later, and they won the bid for the property. And 30 days later, we closed their acquisition financing for them. And they've been the proud owners of that property now for a year and a half. It helped that they were seniors. There were a lot of them home during the day and could go door knocking. The organizing process is a little more difficult when people work all kinds of night shifts and et cetera. So this worked out really well. It's just one example of how nimble we have to be in our marketplace to make these things happen. To give you the broad picture of what we've done over the last almost 4 years, around the country in 12 states, 34 communities have been converted to resident ownership using our limited equity cooperative model. That's over 2,000 homeowners. And this is everywhere from New Hampshire and New England to Montana and the Northwest, Oregon and Washington. And of those 34 communities, 23 are rural. We did this calculation the other day. And of those, in those 23 communities that are rural, there's about $43 million that's been invested by us and others to make those conversions happen. So this is capital intensive work. The average loan I make is about $2.3 million. Some below $1 million, some over $5 million. And we have a package coming in the door today on $23 million worth of 2 communities in Massachusetts that are, one is a senior community, one is a family community in the same town. This will be our biggest effort to date, if we can pull that off. I'm just starting to work on it. And roughly 50% of the people living in those 23 rural communities are seniors. And it's about 1,350 homes, about 60 homes per community. And I think Rick mentioned this earlier. In rural areas, this is often the densest housing you'll find, and the most affordable housing you'll find. Okay, so that's sort of the overview. How do we finance these things? let me spend a few minutes on that. Just like other multifamily housing or commercial real estate, what drives the underwriting process, what drives the lending process is what is that monthly lot rent payment every month represents the revenue to our borrower or the cooperative, and what are the operating expenses that go along with that community. As I said, we use a limited equity cooperative model, which means the memberships that people purchase in the cooperative are nominal amounts of money, $1,000 or less, and those don't appreciate. When you sell your home, you sell your membership, you get back exactly what you put up in our model. There's no appreciation on that. The value in these communities that we want people to realize is in that home that's their individual asset that's going to, as lot rents stabilize over time and their home values increase, they will get the benefit of that, presumably. We've seen some really upside-down situations in Florida and other places where manufactured home communities have been financed with lower blanket mortgages and higher shares, and not everybody could go out and afford to borrow individually for their share loans. And so you have communities that are very large in Florida, 200, 300 sites, where only 30 or 40% of the people are actually members of the co-op, because those are the only people who go out and qualify for the loans. In our portfolio, 82% of the people we have, of the communities we have financed, 82% of the people living there have incomes below 80% of median, which is the HUD low-income threshold. And about 45% have incomes below 60% of median, which is the same income limit for tax credit rental housing in this country. And below that, even about a third of the people homeowners have incomes below 50% of area median income. So we're dealing with a very low income population. So how do we finance these? Rather than make these homeowners go out and finance a share at $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000, we make a loan on the land that goes as high as 110% of the appraised value. The typical Wells Fargo loan that's sold to Fannie Mae on an investor-owned community will be underwritten at 75% of the value of the community when it's appraised, and the rest of the money will be equity coming from the investors who own it. We know the investors who own our co-op communities can't do that, so we make loans of up to 110% of value, meaning if you've got a $4 million appraisal on a 100-site community, which is what we had in suburban Minneapolis earlier last year, we actually made about a $4.3 million loan for that $4 million community. That's risky for us. I mean, we're overvalue, but we're making up that equity piece that these homeowners would otherwise have to finance themselves. Why do we do that? Again, the dirty little secret of the manufactured home community business is once these homes are set, they're very expensive and difficult to move. And so we know there's not going to be a lot of people exiting these communities with their homes. And so that risk is mitigated. And we know that our loan payments can be met given good underwriting of the operations of the community and with a standard 10% cushion that every lender will put on, vacancy and other things that might be lost during the year or expenses that might be higher than projected. And we have this technical assistance provider relationship that will ensure that during the term of our loan, that cooperative borrower is assisted to the extent they need to be with changes in board of directors, with revising their bylaws, with hiring a new property management company if they need to, with refinancing our loan at the end of the 10 or 15 years. They've got professional help throughout the tenure of our loan, and that is a huge factor in why we'll make that 110% or 105% loan-to-value financing. So how do we do this at scale? I would like to be able to sit here today and tell you that over the past almost 4 years, we've developed relationships with the Wells Fargos of the world and the pension funds of the world and the national insurance companies of the world to invest in our loans with us. We're not quite there yet, but we have made tremendous progress. we started, in exactly the worst time in the fall of 2008, trying to build this financial model out. And we knew we would never raise enough capital onto our balance sheet to support a national financing model. So what we do is, and we have $28 million of outstanding loans at this point in time. So what we do is we originate those loans, we underwrite them, we close them, we service them, and we sell typically 75% of each loan to a bigger investor than we are. And in some places, that's like the Minnesota State Housing Finance Agency in Minnesota. In Wisconsin, we're talking with the same folks. In Massachusetts, it's a bank consortium called Massachusetts Housing Partnership, similar one in Connecticut. And other community development financial institutions like Rock USA Capital, like your organization, will invest with us. And so we know, because this is a big marketplace that institutional investors invest in, our challenge is simply getting those same investors to see the co-op model, the resident ownership model, as value added, because we know they're already investing in the resident ownership model. They know the asset class, they like the cash flows, they know the risk is good. And so our challenge has just been getting everybody to buy into the co-op ownership structure, which actually we believe adds value, as I said, because it will limit the increases in lot rents. It'll put more value in the homes, and it'll keep people investing in their neighborhood more than they would otherwise. So that's our biggest challenge. We're still out there marketing to the national insurance companies, the big banks, some of the pension funds, to get them involved with us. But that's where I think we're really going to break through and build this out. I'll just have two more comments, and then I'll turn it over to Cliff, because I think my last comment plays right into his world. I was really happy to hear all the discussion from Stacy and the congressman and the electoral cooperative folks about energy efficiency and water. I look at spreadsheets every day. That's my job, to understand the operating budgets of these communities. And my brain is kind of wired like an Excel spreadsheet. And water is the biggest single operating cost in these communities, typically, other than in some places real estate taxes. So what we've made a commitment to do at Rock USA, in addition to this financing and this technical assistance model, part of our strategic plan is environmental sustainability of these communities. And so with Stacy's help and with the help of others, we're working, and we've just finished a research paper on what are the most cost-effective ways to retrofit, replace, and retrofit infrastructure systems in these communities to produce the greatest affordability for homeowners, because we know subsidy is not going to be the answer here for that. And the last thing I'll say, and then turn over to the credit union discussion, is, and it goes back to what Brian was saying from USDA earlier. Once the community is resident-owned and the land tenure is secured with leases that run forever, the next challenge is getting the homeowners good financing. And we are beginning a partnership now with the San Antonio Credit Union, which is in the top 5 of lenders to manufactured homeowners in the country, behind US Bank and a couple of others, to use their national platform and our underwriting criteria that were developed in New Hampshire to bring a single-family home finance product to the marketplace that will have our brand on it and all of the infrastructure that a national credit union that's licensed to do business in, I think, all 50 states or close to it will bring. And so that's exciting. That's just getting off the ground. It's going to be probably another year before it's up and running with any great numbers. But I'll stop there. I think that covers everything we wanted to touch on. Let Cliff go on with what the credit unions have to offer.
I think the credit unions have a great deal to offer, and Cliff Rosenthal is the executive director of the Federation of Development Credit Unions. located in New York City. He's been there for
32 years.
And has done an incredible job of making community development credit unions an active player in bringing financing and economic security into low-income communities. Cliff is leaving his job for the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, which will benefit, and we will all benefit enormously by that, but I hope you have a good successor picked out there, Cliff, because the Federation is an incredibly important actor. And we're looking to Cliff to talk about partnering up between credit unions and all of the discussion we've had earlier on, and especially the beginnings of a secondary market for selling these loans on. Go ahead.
Thanks, Liz. So this is a pretty scary gathering here. Judge, most of you seem to have been on the agenda already, and I think it's a fair guess that most of you know more about rural housing than I do. Also, I cannot resist saying it's a tough act to follow a rock star. Maybe you've heard that before today. But yeah, just there you go. I couldn't really resist that. So I don't know a great deal about rural housing. I know a little bit about cooperatives because I spent the last 41 years in it as an organizer of food cooperatives. And how many people know that credit unions are cooperatives? I wish more people in the credit union movement knew that. And the dirty secret, quite seriously, I asked a group of credit union folks about that. Are any of you members of cooperatives? And some of them are sort of like, I think I am, you know. So that's a very serious challenge for the cooperative movement. And being, you know, and honestly, the vision that's motivated my career is somehow connecting other sectors of cooperatives with, you know, across sectors and with lately with credit unions. So we've been very active in the International Year of Cooperatives up in New York as well. So yeah, I know a little bit about cooperatives. I live in a 2-unit cooperative in Brooklyn, New York. A cooperative saved my movement. It saved my movement. I moved to New York City from Washington, as it turns out, in 1980 to get married, and we lived in a cooperative house. We call it a commune, in fact. And the connection being this, even without settled work at that time, our living expenses were so low that I was able to essentially work for the Federation for nothing for about a year when we had no federal money on it. So I, you know, in a very practical sense, I'm a real believer in what cooperatives mean economically on that. And I know a little bit about being old, or excuse me, senior. You know, I do collect Social Security at my full age on it, and I'm living in what I think is becoming a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community in Brooklyn, New York. That folks who've been in that community for decades and decades are aging. And the whole notion of cooperative health care or cooperative home care is a very powerful notion for people in my generation. I don't know that it's really fully taken off yet, but I see tremendous potential in it. So in that sense, I'm really happy to be here. So the Federation, though we're based in New York, actually is a national organization. We represent approximately 230 credit unions in 46 states across the United States, from Maine and Vermont to Alaska to Hawaii. And they range from absolutely minuscule, $1 million or less, to nearly $2 billion in assets in El Paso, Texas, for example. So I think the networking, and Michael talked about the importance that we're really very firm believers in networking as a way of achieving scale. Now, we as a federation, I think the most obvious connection that we have is around this issue of share loans. And I'll just talk about some of the barriers of it. Our credit unions deal with individuals, and we develop programs that are directed toward providing credit and financing to people that the Wells Fargos and others are really not interested in historically, and less interested in. Because in fact, what you're going to see, and you've begun to see, is hundreds of thousands of people being pushed out of the banking system, priced out and pushed out. That's the niche that we've always been in, and we will always be in, providing affordable financial services to low-income people. over the last year and a half, we focused on various populations. We have a Latino outreach program, a faith-based credit union outreach program as well. But for the last year and a half, we've been specifically developing a program aimed at increasing the financial security of older adults. This is a courtesy of the Atlantic Philanthropies. I think NCRC is also a grantee of that. Particularly as a result of this recession, people who've lived sober financial lives for decades are in trouble, in lots of trouble. It's from the sources of victimization, the predatory lending, and so forth, and the fact that they're losing their life savings. So, we can't transfer income. That's not what we're capable of doing. But what we can try to do is minimize the outflows of people's income, just in the same way you're trying to reduce the expenses for water, which, by the way, is a crucial problem even in New York City for cooperative housing there. If we can put together something that can save the financial outflows for interest or principal in that matter, again, it's probably the best substitute for income enhancement that is available to us. So, what we try to bring to this, to this dialogue, and again, we're in an early stage of this stuff. We're trying to make connections and fit pieces together. Mike and I have, run into each other at probably 6 conferences in the last couple of years and saying we've got to sit down and talk and find a way to do that. And I think it will come, but it's still early stages, to us. So again, our focus, first of all, the big strength of credit unions is that these are private sector institutions. They're cooperatively owned, and they're private sector. And ultimately, they're not going to depend on this coming election or any other election on it. That's important. They provide the individual financing, which is a piece that goes there. And there is capital available. The credit union industry in total represents almost exactly $1 trillion worth of community-owned assets. And the liquidity, the available liquidity that is not out in loans, I think is probably somewhere between $150 and $200 billion. So there is money there. There is cash that could flow if we can find ways to make this work. How could we possibly fit this in? Well, credit unions, and this addresses the issue of some of the barriers. We are regulated institutions by the National Credit Union Administration and sometimes by state regulators as well. And I can't say that they're particularly familiar with or particularly supportive of the cooperatives, generally speaking. May vary in states, particularly in the Midwest. When you have state regulatory authorities, they may be much more knowledgeable and sympathetic. But at the national level, in terms of the National Credit Union Administration, they kind of look askance at this stuff. They don't understand it. They treat loans to, sort of blanket loans to cooperatives as business loans, and that is sort of a red flag for them. Credit unions are able to make share loans for sure, and in New York City, that's become a pretty big deal. We do have, urban cooperatives that are doing both share loans and some underlyings for cooperative housing, people's mutual housing associations, and so forth. So that that's one barrier. I'm not sure that the compelling need again will be for the underlyings, but we can talk about that. But in terms of the individual share loans, this ought to be a sweet spot for credit unions in terms of the size of loans. We're not talking about $500,000 loans here, $800,000 loans, in that market. 50, 75, 100, 100 and a quarter, something like that. Am I in the ballpark?
Yeah, Stacy was telling us this
And even
morning
less.
about 65 to 85, including the foundation, which is, pretty affordable.
And in the communities we're working with, at least in New Hampshire, the average home loan has been in the $35,000 to $40,000 range.
That ought to be a sweet spot for lots and lots of credit unions. I think that there's a need for education about this kind of entity for sure, and that's something that we have to address. There's a need for information about performance. Well, I'm also on the board of the Fair Mortgage Collaborative that's been working with CFED and so forth, and has aggregated quite a lot of data on the performance of manufactured housing home loans. Not, I don't think really specifically about senior housing and so forth, but about manufactured housing. That is terribly important to us. We're pretty limited in, I think, the appetite for making chattel loans. We want it to be on, secure tenure and cooperative, tenure, ought to work for us. I will say that from the numbers that I've seen, they're pretty darn good in terms of performance by most folks' standards. But again, dealing in a regulated industry, delinquency of 4% sounds pretty good, right? 4%, 5%. It's not our regulators' favorite. They won't be thrilled with that. Dealing in a low-income marketplace, we think that's quite acceptable, really. Because our experience also, and maybe this is true of manufactured housing, is that delinquency does not always translate into charge-offs and lost loans at the same rate as it would for mainstream borrowers. I mean, if you have a $500,000 loan, say for your home, and you're 3 months behind in your payments, you're probably heading down the road to foreclosure. If you're dealing with a local credit union, a small credit union, and you're somewhat behind on it, you're probably going to find a way to catch up. Our regulators don't love that. We try to show data that that's the effect. But it is a case that we're going to have to make. The performance data is incredibly important. And the more slices that we can get at it, whether we can do it regionally, whether we can do it in terms of credit scores and so forth, that'll be very helpful. And I know Fair Mortgage Collaborative has done some of it. Now, we're very excited that what San Antonio is doing. They're a player. Boeing, BECU out in Seattle is another player. Big credit union, about $11 billion credit union that does great stuff, so we're really pleased to see them in the market. Self-Help in North Carolina, I believe, is another one. So we're actually going to be doing a webinar for the credit union movement on April 5th with Fair Mortgage Collaborative and with BECU and Self-Help as well. So, that's one of the tasks that we have, getting this asset class, getting this product known to credit unions, to our regulators as well. And final piece of this is the secondary market. I mean, in the end, lenders don't really like to keep loans on their books indefinitely. And that's why you had Fannie Mae, that you had Freddie Mac. I guess those are probably dirty words in this city now for various reasons, but they played a very important function in providing liquidity to capital markets. So what are we, the Federation, doing in our small way? Well, about 5 years ago, we developed a secondary market, which we call the Community Development Credit Union Mortgage Center. It's an LLC, a single-member LLC. And the notion of that is that we would purchase affordable housing loans originated by low-income credit unions, hold them, and eventually, after properly seasoning them, probably find investors for them, and thereby increase the flow of capital. Because to my understanding, again, one of the reasons that financing for manufactured housing has been expensive is that there haven't been outlets. If you have a pipeline to secondary market, it will lower the cost of origination. So we got slammed by this recession, just like a lot of folks. I mean, ROC is one of the most innovative community development financial entities out there, by the way. Reception has been bad on 100 different levels. We've managed, and we're talking in single digits millions at this point. We have about 6-7 million in a portfolio, but we have an appetite for more. Our policies, would allow us to purchase share loans in manufactured housing. We would like to do it on a trial basis and try to get that flow going as we learn more about the field. We wouldn't mind at all if we had some federal partners that were willing to provide credit enhancement for this. That would be another big means to remove some of the barriers. And then I'm sure if you can enhance this in any way, and you may not, I mean, the numbers don't suggest that there should need to be a major credit enhancement, but it sure wouldn't hurt. And when you're dealing with proof of concept here, anything like that can provide additional security, I think would be very helpful. So, in short, it's very exciting what folks folks are doing here. I mean, I'm just thrilled to hear about that. And, hopefully my successor, since I'm a short timer after 32 years, I've got 6 weeks to go before I go over to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I'm hoping that my successor will see fit to do this. We do have our mortgage person in place, and sometime Mike and I are really going to sit down on the table and do something really concrete to make the next steps happen.
The good news is that in our portfolio at Rock USA Capital, which is, again, only 3 to 4 years old, no losses, no delinquencies, no big oopses yet. We do have, like any prudent lender, loan loss reserve policies, and we reserve against our potential losses like any other lender would do. The bigger story is that in the 26 years and the 100 communities that have been financed in New Hampshire, not one loss, not one write-off, charge-off, partial write-off or charge-off. A few, workouts that are temporary to give people some room to solve some problems. But again, we have the data that Cliff is talking about to prove that the asset class performs. Now, has it performed all around the country yet? No, we can't say that, but we're building that record. Given that these folks, and Terry alluded to this earlier, and it's the first thing I look at when I underwrite a loan application, how long have these people lived in this community? If this group of people, and let's say there's 50 of them, and 35 of them have been there 7 years or longer, this is a stable community. These people aren't going very far. And if they've been paying their monthly charges on time, we could pretty much underwrite that cash flow and be pretty certain that we're not going to have big vacancy issues, we're not going to have big payment delinquency issues, and our debt service is going to get paid. Like any other lender, we fund debt service reserves, we require capital improvement reserves for future capital replacements. So we do all the things that any prudent multifamily housing lender would do to mitigate all those risks. The advantage to this asset class being these people really have an investment in their community, both in their home, with the equity they've put into their home, and the time equity, let's call it, that they've been living there. San Antonio Credit Union is not putting up their balance sheet. They're putting up their origination and servicing platform. We will have to raise the money, but the advantage is we get to set the eligibility criteria. Like Cliff mentioned, San Antonio Credit Union may not underwrite all the homeowners that we would underwrite. We don't use credit scores that often. We use job history. We use a lot of other things in the New Hampshire model that get to success for us. So the flexibility is that they're not imposing their credit standards on our population. We're bringing our own credit standards to it, and we're just basically buying their origination and servicing apparatus, so we don't have to recreate the wheel, as somebody said earlier. And it'll take a while because we have to create a new entity to do this, and we have to test it, and we've got to raise capital, and so it's going to be a little while. But the whole idea is to enable homeowners in these communities that we've already converted around the country to take advantage of the same kind of product that homeowners in New Hampshire have taken advantage of for the past 10 years, and which, as was mentioned earlier, now the 504 program is recognizing that. Fannie Mae has bought single-family mortgage loans in resident-owned communities in New Hampshire. It's the only manufactured housing home loans Fannie Mae is purchasing now. And so we're trying to take that model that's been so successful and replicate it with a national infrastructure.
Generally speaking, New Market's tax credit programs are not oriented toward housing, but rather to small business. Is this
But
for investor properties?
This is interesting because this is the park conversion. And
Yeah.
therefore, if it's in the right locale for New Market's tax credits, because it's, locale-based, this is a commercial facility, not.
It depends what tax opinion you get. I've gotten both.
Yeah, okay, all right, good to know. Let me ask you, again, from the financial aspect, we talk a lot about 30-year mortgages and so forth, but, for fixed housing or whatever, the actual duration of the loan tends to be more like 7 or 8 years because people move a lot. What do you know? What kind of data is there for manufactured housing? How long people stay?
Somebody was talking about that earlier.
Rick, do you know? I don't know the answer to that.
Do we know? I think that it was HAC or USDA talking about greater longevity, especially in rural
Interesting.
communities, than in general,
Yeah.
and certainly for seniors.
Sure. I'm sure one of those major financial companies you described has a really precise model of that. It would be very interesting to find that out.
Well, they might not, those major, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but those major financing companies might not, because the resale is often a sort of land contract resale, that is, the seller finances. So the loan may stay in place.
Right, but if they're securitizing, they
Yeah.
probably have to provide that information to potential, well, I don't know what they have to do on Wall Street over the last 10 years.
I have no
You'd
idea.
think that they should, but we don't know what they've provided.